Good morning, friends. We are on Chapter 8. Storm clouds gather. If evenings were pleasant, daytimes grew increasingly tense. We were too big, the group was too large, the web too widespread. For a year and a half now, we had gotten away with our double lives. Ostensibly, we were still an elderly watchmaker living with his two spinster daughters above his tiny shop. In actuality, the Beijing was the center of an underground ring that spread now to the farthest corners of Holland. Here daily came dozens of workers, reports, appeals. Sooner or later we were going to make a mistake. It was mealtimes especially when I worried. There were so many now for every meal that we had to set the chairs diagonally around the dining room table. The cat loved this arrangement. Yusi had given him the Hebrew name Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, meaning appropriately enough, hastening to the spoils, hurrying to the prey. With the chairs set so close, MS Hashbaz could circle the entire table on our shoulders, purring furiously, traveling round and round. But I was uneasy at being so many. The dining room was only 5 steps above the street level. A tall passerby could see right in the window. We'd hung a white curtain across it, providing a kind of screen while letting in light. Still, only when the heavy blackout shades were drawn at night did I feel truly private. At lunch one day, looking through the thin curtain, I thought I saw a figure standing just outside in the alley. When I looked again a minute later, it was still there. There was no reason for anyone to linger there, unless he was curious about what went on in the Beijing. I got up and parted the curtain an inch. Standing a few feet away, seemingly immobilized by some terrible emotion, was old Catrienne from Nolly's house. I bolted down the stairs, threw open the door, and pulled her inside. Although the August day was hot, the old lady's hands were cold as ice. "Catrienne, what are you doing here? Why were you just standing there?" "She's gone mad," she sobbed. "Your sister's gone mad." "Nolly? Oh, what's happened?" "They came," she said. "The S.D. I don't know what they know or who told them. Your sister and Annalise were in the living room, and I heard her." The sobs broke out again. "I heard her." "Heard what?" I nearly screamed. "Heard what she told them. They pointed at Annalise and said, 'Is this a Jew?' And your sister said yes." I felt my knees go weak. Annalise, blonde, beautiful, young Annalise with the perfect papers. And she trusted us. Oh, Nolly, Nolly, what has your rigid honesty done? And then?" I asked. "I don't know. I ran out the back door. She's gone mad." I left Catrienne in the dining room, wheeled my bicycle down the stairs, and bumped as fast as I could the mile and a half to Nolly's. Today the sky did not seem larger above the Wagenweg at the corner of Bossenhofenstraat. I leaned my bike against a lamp-post and stood panting, my heart throbbing in my throat. Then, as casually as I was able, I strolled up the sidewalk toward the house. Except for a car parked at the street curb directly in front, everything looked deceptively normal. I walked past. Not a sound from behind the white curtains. Nothing to distinguish this house from the replicas of it on either side. When I got to the corner, I turned around. At that moment the door opened and Nolly came out. Behind her walked a man in a brown business suit. A minute later a second man appeared, half pulling, half supporting Annalise. The young woman's face was white as chalk. Twice before they reached the car I thought she would faint. The car door slammed, the motor roared, and they were gone. I pedaled back to the Beijing, fighting back tears of anxiety. Nolly, we soon learned, had been taken to the police station around the corner to one of the cells and back. But Annalise had been sent to the old Jewish theater in Amsterdam, from which Jews were transported to extermination camps in Germany and Poland. It was Mate G, stooped, careworn little Mate G, whose offer to help we had discounted, who kept us in touch with Nolly. She was in wonderful spirits, Mate G said, singing hymns and songs in her high, sweet soprano. How could she sing when she had betrayed another human being? Mate G delivered the bread that Betsy baked for Nolly each morning and the blue sweater Nolly asked for, her favorite with flowers embroidered over the pocket. Mate G relayed another message from Nolly, one especially for me. No ill will happen to Annalise. God will not let them take her to Germany. He will not let her suffer because I obeyed him. 6 days after Nolly's arrest, the telephone rang. Pickwick's voice was on the other end. "I wonder, my dear, if I could trouble you to deliver that watch yourself." A message, then, that he could not relay over the phone. I biked at once out to Ardenhout, taking along a man's watch for safe measure. Pickwick waited until we were in the drawing-room with the door shut. "The Jewish theater in Amsterdam was broken into last night. 40 Jews were rescued, one of them, a young woman, who was most insistent that Nolly know Annalise is free." He fixed me with one of his wide-set eyes. "Do you understand this message?" I nodded, too overcome with relief and joy to speak. How had Nolly known? How had she been so sure? After 10 days in the Haarlem jail, Nolly was transferred to the federal prison in Amsterdam. Pickwick said that the German doctor in charge of the prison hospital was a humane man who occasionally arranged a medical discharge. I went at once to Amsterdam to see him. But what could I say, I wondered, as I waited in the entrance hall of his home? How could I get into the good graces of this man? Lolling about the foyer, sniffing from time to time at my legs and hands, were 3 perfectly huge Doberman pinschers. I remembered the books we were reading aloud by bicycle lamp, How to Win Friends and Influence People. One of the techniques advocated by Dale Carnegie was, find the man's hobby, dogs, I wonder. At last the maid returned and showed me into a small sitting room. How smart of you, doctor, I said in German to the grizzle-haired man on the sofa. Smart? Yes, to bring these lovely dogs with you. They must be good company when you have to be away from your family. The doctor's face brightened. You like dogs, then? About the only dogs I had ever known were Harry DeVries bulldogs. Bulls are my favorite. Do you like bulls? People don't realize it, the doctor said eagerly, but bulldogs are very affectionate. For perhaps 10 minutes, while I racked my brain for everything I had ever heard or read on the subject, we talked about dogs. Then abruptly the doctor stood up. But I'm sure you haven't come here to talk about dogs. What's on your mind? I met his eyes. I have a sister in prison here in Amsterdam. I was wondering if... I don't think she's well. The doctor smiled. So you aren't as interested in dogs at all. I'm interested now, I said, smiling too. But I'm far more interested in my sister. What's her name? Nolly Van Woerden. The doctor went out of the room and came back with a brown notebook. Yes, one of the recent arrivals. Tell me something about her. What is she in prison for? Taking a chance, I told the doctor about that Nolly's crime had been hiding a Jew. I also told him that she was the mother of 6 children, who, if left without aid, could become a burden to the state. I did not mention that the youngest of these children was now 17. Well, we'll see. We walked to the door of the sitting room. You must excuse me now. I was more encouraged than at any time since Nolly's arrest as I rode the train back to Haarlem. But days, then a week, then 2 weeks passed, and there was no further news. I went back to Amsterdam. I've come to see how those Dobermans are, I told the doctor. He was not amused. You mustn't bother me. I know that you have not come to talk about dogs. You must give me time. So there was nothing to do but wait. It was a bright September noon when 17 of us were squeezed around the dining-room table. All of a sudden, Nils, seated across from me, turned pale. Nils, one of our workers, had come to report old Katrien safely arrived at a farm north of Alkmaar. Now Nils spoke in a low, normal voice. Do not turn around. Someone is looking over the curtain. Over the curtain? But that was impossible. He'd have to be 10 feet high. The table fell silent. He's on a ladder washing the window, Nils said. I didn't order the windows washed, said Betsy. Whoever it was, we mustn't sit here in this frozen, guilty silence. Yussi had an inspiration. Happy birthday, he sang. Happy birthday to you. We all got the idea and joined in lustily. Happy birthday, dear Opa. The song was still echoing through the Beijing when I went out the side door and stood next to the ladder, looking up at the man holding bucket and sponge. What are you doing? We didn't want the windows washed, especially not during the party. The man took a piece of paper from his hip pocket and consulted. Isn't this Cooper's? They're across the street, but anyhow, come in and help us celebrate. The man shook his head. He thanked me, but he had work to do. I watched him crossing the Bertel-Joar-straat with his ladder to Cooper's candy store. Did it work? A clamor of voices asked when I got back to the dining room. Do you think he was spying? I didn't answer. I didn't know. That was the hardest, never knowing. And one of the biggest unknowns was my own performance under questioning. As long as I was awake, I felt fairly sure of myself. But if they should come at night, over and over again the group worked with me. Nils, Henk, Leendert, bursting into my room without warning, shaking me awake, hurling questions at me. The first time it happened, I was sure the real raid had come. There was a terrific pounding on my door. Then the beam of a flashlight in my eyes. Get up, on your feet. I could not see the man who was speaking. Are you hiding your 9 Jews? Where are you hiding your 9 Jews? We only have 6 Jews now. There was an awful silence. The room light came on to show Rolf clutching his head with his hands. Oh no, he kept saying. It can't be that bad. Think now. said Hank just behind him. "The Gestapo is trying to trap you. The answer is, what Jews? We don't have Jews here." "Can I try again?" "Not now," said Rolf. "You're wide awake now." They tried again a few nights later. "The Jews you're hiding, where did they come from?" I sat up groggily. "I don't know. They just come to the door." Rolf flung his hat to the floor. "No, no, no!" he shouted. "What Jews? There are no Jews. Can't you learn?" "I'll learn," I promised. "I'll do better." And sure enough, the next time I woke a little more completely, half a dozen shadowy forms filled the room. "Where do you hide the ration cards?" the voice demanded. Under the bottom stair, of course, but this time I would not be trapped into saying so. A crafty reply occurred to me. "In the Frisian clock on the stairwell." Kik sat down beside me on the bed and put an arm around me. "That was better, Tante Corrie," he said. "You tried this time, but remember, you have no cards except the 3 for you, Oppa, and Tante Betsy. There is no underground activity here. You don't understand what they're talking about." Gradually, with repeated drills, I got better. Still, when the time actually came, when there were real Gestapo agents really trained in getting the truth from people, how would I perform? Willem's underground work brought him frequently to Haarlem. There was an expression of something like despair mingled now with the worry lines in his face. Twice soldiers had been to the nursing home, and although he had managed to deceive them about most of the Jews still in residence there, one sick blind old woman had been taken away. 91, Willem kept saying. She couldn't even walk. They had to carry her to the car. So far, Willem's position as a minister had prevented direct action against him and Teeny, but he was watched, he said, more closely than ever. To provide an official reason for his visits to Haarlem, he started conducting a weekly prayer fellowship at the Beijing each Wednesday morning. But Willem could do nothing routinely, especially pray. For soon the meeting was attended by dozens of Haarlemers hungry for something to believe in. This 4th year of the occupation. Most of us coming to the services had no idea of the double life of the Beijing. Most of those. In a way, they posed a fresh danger as they passed workers and couriers from their underground groups coming and going on the narrow stairs. But in another way, we thought, it might be an advantage to have these flocks of obviously innocent people in and out. That, at least, was our hope. We were sitting around the supper table after curfew one night, 3 Ten Booms, the 7 permanent guests, and 2 Jews for whom we were seeking homes, when the shop doorbell chimed. A customer after closing, and one bold enough to stand on the Bartle Joerstraat after curfew, taking the keys from my pocket. I hurried down to the hall, unlocked the workshop door, and felt my way through the dark store. At the front door I listened a moment. "Who's there?" I called. "Do you remember me?" A man's voice speaking German. "Who is it?" I asked in the same language. "An old friend come for a visit. Open the door." I fumbled with the lock and drew the door gingerly back. It was a German soldier in uniform. Before I could reach the alarm button behind the door, he had pushed his way inside. Then he took off his hat, and in the October twilight I recognized the young German watchmaker whom father had discharged 4 years ago. "Otto!" I cried. "Captain Altschuler," he corrected me. "Our positions are slightly reversed, Miss Ten Boom, are they not?" I glanced at his insignia. He was not a captain or anything close to it, but I said nothing. He looked around the shop. "Same stuffy little place," he said. He reached for the wall switch, but I put my hand over it. "No, we don't have the blackout shades in the shop." "Well, let's go upstairs where we can talk over old times. That old clock cleaner still around?" "Christoffels. He died in the fuel shortage last winter." Otto shrugged. "Good riddance, then. What about the Piaf's old Bible reader?" I was edging my way to the sales counter where another bell was located. "Father is very well, thank you." "Well, aren't you going to invite me up to pay my respects?" Why was he so eager to go upstairs? Had the wretched fellow come just to gloat, or did he suspect something? My finger found the button. "What was that?" Otto whirled around suspiciously. "What was what?" "That sound. I heard a kind of buzzing." I didn't hear anything. But Otto had started back through the workshop. "Wait!" I shouted. "Let me get the front door locked and I'll go up with you. I want to see how long it takes them to recognize you." I dawdled at the door as long as I dared. Definitely his suspicions were aroused. Then I followed him through the rear door into the hall. Not a sound from the dining room or the stairs. I dashed past him up the stairs and rapped on the door. "Father, Betsy," I cried in, what I hoped was a playful voice. "I'll give you 3, no, 6 guesses who's standing here." "No guessing games." Otto reached past me and flung open the door. Father and Betsy looked up from their meal. The table was set for 3, my unfinished plate on the other side. It was so perfect that even I, who had just seen 12 people eating here, could scarcely believe this was anything but an innocent old man dining with his daughters. The Alpina sign stood on the sideboard. They had remembered everything. Uninvited, Otto pulled out a chair. "Well," he crowed, "things happened just like I said, didn't they?" "So it would seem," Father said mildly. "Betsy," I said, "give Captain Altschuler some tea." Otto took a sip of the brew Betsy poured him and glared around the table at us. "Where did you get real tea? No one else in Holland has tea. How stupid of me." The tea had come from Pickwick. "If you must know," I said, "it comes from a German officer, but you mustn't ask any further questions." I tried to imply clandestine dealings with a high occupation official. Otto lingered another 15 minutes, and then, feeling perhaps that he had underlined his victory sufficiently, sauntered out onto the empty streets. It was only after another half-hour that we dared give the all-clear to 9 cramped and shaky people. The second week in October, during a particularly hectic morning with underground problems, the secret telephone number rang downstairs in the hall. I hurried down to pick it up, only Father, Betsy, and I ever answered it. "Well," said a voice, "aren't you coming to pick me up?" It was Nolly. "Nolly, when? How? Where are you?" "At the train station in Amsterdam, only I have no money for the train fare." "Stay right there. Oh, Nolly, we're coming." I biked to Bossenhovenstraat, and then, with Flip and the children, who happened to be at home, hurried to the Haarlem station. We saw Nolly even before our train came to a stop in Amsterdam, her bright blue sweater like a patch of blue sky in the big dark shed. 7 weeks in prison had left her pallid-faced, but as radiantly Nolly as ever. A prison doctor, she said, had pronounced her low blood pressure a serious condition, one that might leave her permanently disabled and her 6 children a burden to society. Her face crinkled in puzzlement as she said it. Christmas 1943 was approaching. The light snow that had fallen was the only festive quality of the season. Every family seemed had someone in jail or in a work camp or in hiding. For once the religious side of the holidays was uppermost in every mind. At the Beijing we had not only Christmas to celebrate, but also Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights. Betsy found a Hanukkah candle stand among the treasures stored with us behind the dining room cupboard, and set it up on the upright piano. Each night we lighted one more candle as Yusi read the story of the Maccabees. Then we would sing haunting, melancholy desert music. We were all very Jewish those evenings. About the 5th night of the festival, as we were gathering around the piano, the doorbell in the alley rang. I opened it to find Mrs. Buchers, wife of the optician next door, standing in the snow. Mrs. Buchers was as round and placid as her husband was thin and worried, but tonight her plump face was twisted with anxiety. "Do you think," she whispered, "your Jews could sing a little more softly? We can hear them right through the walls, and, well, there are all kinds of people on this street." Back in Tante John's rooms, we considered this news in consternation. If the Buchers family knew all about our affairs, how many other people in Haarlem did too? It wasn't long before we discovered that one who did was the chief of police himself. One dark January morning, when it was trying to snow again, Toos burst into underground headquarters in Tante John's rear room, clutching a letter in her hand. The envelope bore the seal of the Haarlem police. I tore it open. Inside, on the police chief's stationery, was a handwritten note. I read it silently, then aloud. "You will come to my office this afternoon at 3 o'clock. For 20 minutes we tried to analyze that note. Some felt it was not a prelude to arrest. Why would the police give you a chance to escape? Still, it was safest to prepare for search and imprisonment. Workers slipped out of the house one at a time. Boarders emptied wastebaskets and picked up scraps of sewing in preparation for a quick flight to the secret room. I burned incriminating papers in the long, empty coal hearth in the dining room. The cat caught the tension in the air and sulked beneath the sideboard. Then I took a bath. Perhaps the last for months, and packed a prison bag according to what Nolly and the others had learned. A Bible, a pencil, needle and thread, soap, or what we called soap these days, toothbrush and comb. I dressed in my warmest clothes with several sets of underwear and a second sweater beneath the top one. Just before 3, I hugged Father and Betsy tight and walked through the grey slush to the Smeddestraat. The policeman on duty was an old acquaintance. He looked at the letter, then at me with a curious expression. "This way," he said. He knocked at the door marked Chief. The man who sat behind the desk had red-gray hair combed forward over a bald spot. A radio was playing. The chief reached over and twisted the volume knob, not down but up. "Miss Ten Boom," he said. "Welcome." "How do you do, sir?" The chief had left his desk to shut the door behind me. "Do sit down," he said. "I know all about you, you know, about your work." "The watchmaking, you mean? You're probably thinking more about my father's work than my own." The chief smiled. No, I mean your other work. Ah, then you're referring to my work with retarded children. Yes, let me tell you about that. No, Miss Ten Boom, the chief lowered his voice. I am not talking about your work with retarded children. I'm talking about still another work, and I want you to know that some of us here are in sympathy. The chief was smiling broadly now. Tentatively I smiled back. Now, Miss Ten Boom, he went on, I have a request. The chief sat down on the edge of his desk and looked at me steadily. He dropped his voice until it was just audible. He was, he said, working with the underground himself, but an informer in the police department was leaking information to the Gestapo. There's no way for us to deal with this man but to kill him. A shudder went down my spine. What alternative have we? The chief went on in a whisper. We can't arrest him. There are no prisons except those controlled by the Germans. But if he remains at large, many others will die. That is why I wondered, Miss Ten Boom, if in your work you might know someone who could kill him. Yes. I leaned back. Was this all a trap to trick me into admitting the existence of a group, into naming names? Sir, I said at last, seeing the chief's eyes flicker impatiently, I have always believed that it was my role to save life, not destroy it. I understand your dilemma, however, and I have a suggestion. Are you a praying man? Aren't we all these days? Then let us pray together now that God will reach the heart of this man so that he does not continue to betray his countrymen. There was a long pause. Then the chief nodded. That I would like very much to do. And so there in the heart of the police station, with the radio blaring out the latest news from the German advance, we prayed. We prayed that this Dutchman would come to realize his worth in the sight of God and the worth of every human being on earth. At the end of the prayer, the chief stood up. Thank you, Miss Ten Boom. You shook my hand. Thank you again. I know now that it was wrong to ask you. Still clutching my prison bag, I walked through the foyer and around the corner to the Beijing. Upstairs, people crowded around, wanting to know everything, but I did not tell them, not everything. I did not want Father and Betsy to know that we had been asked to kill. It would have been an unnecessary burden for them to bear. The episode with the chief of police should have been encouraging. Apparently we had friends in high places. As a matter of fact, the news had the opposite effect upon us. Here was one more illustration of how our secret was no secret at all. All of Haarlem seemed to know what we were up to. We knew we should stop the work, but how could we? Who would keep open the network of supplies and information on which the safety of hundreds depended? If a hideaway had to be abandoned, as happened all the time, who would coordinate the move to another address? We had to go on, but we knew that disaster could not be long in coming. As a matter of fact, it came first to Jop, the 17-year-old apprentice who had sought a safe home at the Beijing. Late one afternoon near the end of January 1944, Rolf stepped stealthily into the workshop. He glanced at Jop. I nodded. Jop was party to everything that went on in the house. There's an underground home in the Eid that is going to be raided this evening. Do you have anyone who can go? But I did not. Not a single courier or escort person was at the Beijing this late in the day. I'll go, Jop said. I opened my mouth to protest that he was inexperienced and liable to the factory transport himself if stopped on the street. Then I thought of the unsuspecting people at the Eid. We had a wardrobe of girls' scarves and dresses upstairs. Then quickly, boy, Rolf said. You must leave immediately. He gave Jop the details and hurried away. In a few moments, Jop reappeared, making a very pretty brunette in a long coat and kerchief, a fur muff hiding his hands. Did the lad have some kind of premonition? To my astonishment, he turned at the door and kissed me. Jop was supposed to be back by 7 p.m. curfew. 7 came and went. Perhaps he had been delayed and would return in the morning. We did have a visitor early the next day, but it was not Jop. I knew the minute Rolf stepped through the door that bad news was weighing him down. It's Jop, isn't it? Yes. What happened? Rolf had learned the story from the sergeant at the night desk. When Jop got to the address in Eid, the Gestapo was already there. Jop had rung the bell. The door was opened. Pretending to be the owner of the house, the SD man had invited Jop in. And Corrie, Rolf said, we must face it. The Gestapo will get information out of Jop. They have already taken him to Amsterdam. How long will he be able to hold his tongue? Once again we considered stopping the work. Once again we discovered we could not. That night Father and Betsy and I prayed long after the others had gone to bed. We knew that in spite of daily mounting risks, we had no choice but to move forward. This was evil's hour. We could not run away from it. Perhaps only when human effort had done its best and failed would God's power alone be free to work. Have a good day, friends.